Hi guys, this is Steve with another Mirror Maze tutorial. Today we're going to learn how to build a tornado in Xparticles. So we're going to use the follow spline modifier along with a parametric helix spline, which will allow us to have full control over how this tornado looks throughout our animation. The great thing is it's super flexible, easy to use once we have it set up, and easy to modify if you ever want to come back or change the look of it in the future. And the other awesome thing about this is it renders super fast just using hair and the standard renderer. So let's get in and build this. Alright, so we're going to get started here with a helix, and we're just going to rotate that on the XZ axis and change the height a little bit, maybe about 600 or so, just to give us some height. And then we're going to change the start radius and just adjust the angle a little bit so we get start to see the formation of a tornado a little bit better. So once we add a few more degrees to the end angle, we'll get more rotation in there. Another thing we can do to get that shape going is adjust the radial and height bias, which will give us some variation in the separation between the segments. So that's getting us a pretty good looking tornado shape right now. If we just increase the end radius a bit, that will get us started. So that's looking pretty good. And you'll see that the subdivision over there needs to be adjusted just a little bit. So now we're going to go into our front view and we're going to create another helix object, which, this is the quickest way to create another spline, just a linear spline that we can control our helix with. So we'll just decrease the radius, the start and the end radius, and you'll see that we have a straight line now. You just change the subdivisions to 3 because we only need 4 points total. And make it editable, and you'll see that our points here are pretty well spaced, and just change our interpolation to b-spline so that it moves a little bit more naturally. I'll just select a few points here to show you. So we have basically a pretty good natural looking shape and movement that lends itself well to a tornado. So next thing we're going to do is grab a cloner and make a cube, the child of that, so that we can begin to start creating our rig. So we'll want to drag our spline into the object mode and place that on the vertices. And we can scale down our cubes a little bit. These, to your preference, because these will be our controllers. So whatever looks good to you, but that's looking pretty good to me right now. It's all your preference. So once you get it good, you can just make the cloner editable, and we'll name that controller. And so we have 0 at the bottom, 1, 2, 3 at the top. And let's take a look at our spline before we hop into Xpresso. So you'll want to select your spline and go to the structure manager here. And let's see, so if we're in point mode, we can click on 0, 1, 2, 3. So this is basically telling us what point and where it lies in the X, Y, Z coordinates. So 3 is at the top, 0 is at the bottom, similar to our setup here. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3. That all looks good. We're going to add an Xpresso tag to our spline. And this is a very basic setup here. We're going to drag our spline in and our cube. And then the only node we need to add is a point node. So we're going to attach the object input of the point node to the spline object output. And what we're doing right now is basically attaching the cube to the points on the spline so that we can have full control over those later on. So point position goes to the cube's global coordinates, or global position. And then the only thing we have to adjust in the point node is the point index over here. So let's see, let's just nudge this over and move our scene over. So if we grab onto our 0, we'll see that we already have control of that. So we're just going to duplicate this, control drag down once you have it selected, and we're just going to repeat these few steps, dragging in our cube number 1 and then point position to the global position, and change the point index to 1. So it's good that we have, you know, our the naming conventions aligned so that cube 1 goes with spline point 1. Just keeps things a lot simpler that way. So we'll delete cube 1 and add cube 2 and connect the point position to the global position here and adjust the point index to 2. And one more. Control drag that down and replace that. Point position, just get rid of it. Point position to the global position and change the index to 3. So now, assuming that we didn't skip over everything, we can just test these out real quick. So there's that one. 2 looks good. 1 looks good. So for the purposes of animating this, we're just going to combine the top 2 and the bottom 2 and name those. So now these top ones, here, we'll rearrange these so it makes a little more sense. Top, bottom, 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay. Yeah, no, that's, oh, okay. You know what we're gonna do? Sorry. Let's just get those. Hopefully you didn't make the same mistake I did. Okay. Now we can group them. And boom. Alright, so we'll call these top, call that bottom. Now if we move the top, these 2 move together, bottom 2 move together. So this will be nice controlling the tornado, because you can see that we'll have the bottom vertex point still attached to the ground, and then it curves up and around. Because if you move these separate, then it's just not going to have that same look. So we get a nice kind of definition of our funnel shape. Next thing we're going to do is add a spline wrap to our helix. Just make it a child of our helix. And add our spline in there. And change the axis to positive y. So now if we grab this controller, we can see that it is warping the spline. You can see also too that it's jumping once you know, we're experiencing the gimbal lock kind of situation. One way to fix that is to adjust the up vector just a little bit, and now try it out. There we go. That's perfect. Good. So there's our basic rig for this thing. Pretty nice. You can, you know, control it however you want. You could use a vibrate tag, or you could align, you know, this to a spline, a circle spline, and have it follow around it, however you prefer. We're just going to do kind of a quick animation setup once we get things going. So now next we're going to add an XP system and add an emitter. And we're just going to hide these cubes. Okay. Zoom into the bottom here, and we're going to change this emitter shape to a circle and reduce it to about 20. That's good. So we'll see we're emitting. Let's see, maybe let's start with like 400. We'll probably increase that later. So we have about 400. We're going to increase our timeline so we have more room. And let's see. Oh, hold on one second. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure my audio was recording. I got freaked out that it might not be capturing my audio, but here it is. All right, so anyway, we have these emitting, and next thing we're going to want to do is add a modifier to align that to the spline. It's called a follow spline modifier. So we'll just want to drag our helix in there, and you'll see that it starts to jump to the spline in kind of various points. We don't want the nearest point, but we're going to do specific vertex and have that go right into vertex 0, the start of our spline. So there it goes, and you can see, maybe you can see the detail, but it's following it very tightly. What we can do to make that a little bit more interesting is increase the offset value. Change it to about 25, I think. Let's see. Yeah, it's hard to tell when you have just kind of these sprites cruising around, but yeah, that looks pretty good. And we're really going to see a difference here once we add the hair in. And actually, just to make things a little more interesting, I'm going to drag my top controller over. There, that's good. Now it's starting to look like a tornado. So the next thing we want to do is add a little bit of turbulence to this. And we're going to affect both the offset and velocity, so we can just choose both. And we can increase the scale of this. So as you adjust the scale, we can have a little bit larger of a scale and change the strength so we can see it really starting to affect it more. So you can play with these values. If you had a greater strength, it may be a little too chaotic, but something around like 60 works pretty well. Just adds some turbulence to the situation, and kind of hides the fact that we're using this helix as a guide. So that's kind of nice. I mean, I really love that this is attached to the helix and we have all of this control over it, because we can do whatever we want with this and change the look of this very easily. All right, so we might want to increase the speed of our emitter just so we can see this travel up there quicker. I'm going to increase my timeline just a little bit. All right, now what I want to do is, it's probably fine for most of the purposes of this, but what we're going to do is zoom down into our bottom here and see what's going on. I'm going to increase the start radius to like 200 just so we can illustrate what the deal is here. But so you can see that these particles have to travel from the emitter and then go to the follow spline, which is fine if you keep it at a small scale, but if you want to have a larger starting radius like this, you're not going to want to see that. You're not going to want to see that path. So we're just going to rotate this 90 degrees so they're traveling directly to it. One thing I thought was, you could do a spline, align to spline, but the thing about that is it only attaches to the helix itself. It's not going to respect the spline wrap, so it's not really super effective. So what we're going to have to do here is make this whole system action controlled, which is it's pretty simple. So we can get started, but first actually let's just add our generator. We'll add a trails to this and connect our emitter. And we'll change the trail length to maybe something like 16-ish. So now you'll see, okay, the trails start in the middle, and this is when it starts to look kind of ugly, at least for me. It just doesn't seem as natural. So, excuse me. So we're going to add a question to our emitter. Do question, add a question, and we're basically gonna say, if the age is anything greater than 0, then we want it to start following the spline. We want it to start activating the follow spline modifier. So nothing's going to change there, but you'll notice that now this follow spline is action controlled. It switched that over. So that's going to allow us to add different questions and actions to this whole sequence, which will give us a little bit more control over the tornado itself. So the next thing we're going to want to do is add another question. And this one is going to be particle position. So distance along the spline, and we're going to just change that to distance along spline parameter. And so we want it to start right at the beginning of the spline, so we can change that to 0% as well. And then we need an action to take place. And the action is going to basically turn on our XP trail. So object actions, change trails, and then drag our trail object in there. And select generate trail. So you can see nothing changes there. What we're going to have to do is go to our trail and turn off trails from particle birth, which will then allow the action to take place. And so those are starting kind of abruptly, but we'll address that once we get our hair in, because we can kind of feather the length in and then feather it out at the top. Now another thing we need to do is check out, well, the great thing about this too now is that we'll just let it play, and we can reduce the start radius, and it's kind of hard to see in this chaotic mess, but it updates, it will follow with it. So you could animate this parameter, have that shrinking or growing, and it will just start right at the beginning of the spline like it should, which is awesome. So we'll change that back down to like 40. And now we need to see what happens at the top, because we're going to need another action to control that. So we'll just turn off our trails and check out these particles. Maybe we'll get there before it reaches 600 frames, maybe. Yeah. Just kind of waiting on it. Another thing we could do is just speed up this whole system. Yeah, we'll just speed it up, make it go light speed so we can move along. 18. This is just for illustrative purposes. So there it's traveling up super fast, and then look, the particles just spray off into space. And we don't want that, not with this tornado anyway. So what we're going to do is add one more question to the stack, and we're going to go to our emitter, and under questions we're going to add another distance along the spline and reach the end of spline. So that's already there, and let's just organize these in our stack and call this one end. And there, so we start with particle age, then we distance along spline, and then we end. Okay, so we have our question there, but now we need an action to actually execute. So that action is going to be change life. So let's see, is that a direct action? Yes, change life. And it's just gonna, it's kill particles. So I believe that is all set to go. So now we can, so it just kills the particles immediately at the end. So there's our question action setup, and it's really not that bad. It's I've been learning more about it, and it's it's fun to get into. It's going to take a little time to experiment with these as you go through, but it's definitely helpful. You can see the benefits of it right here. It's pretty great. All right, so next thing we're going to do is change the speed back to maybe like what was it, 300 or something, 350, and we can add a higher birth rate in. So there we go. Get those particles traveling up nice and fast and turbulent and all that good stuff. And And you can adjust your turbulence as you like. You can have the offset value a little bit greater so they're not as tight around the spline, and that will take a minute to catch up. So yeah, you can see like right now it looks a little bit blurry, but once we get the trails in there, I think it will make a lot more sense. So yeah, we have the trails in there and it's a lot tighter, nicer. So that's looking pretty good. My computer's chugging along right now because I'm tied up with rendering. Okay, so I went to render and nothing's there. So we need to add a material. We're going to add a hair material and drag that onto our XP trail. And we're just going to make it white. And we're going to affect the color of this with some lights. And we'll keep the specular just default, and we're going to change the tip to just match the root. And now we can adjust the scale. So let's see, if we just render really quick, do like a little region over here, you can see that they kind of feather out at the end, and maybe we can see down in the beginning. But so that adds kind of a nice transition in and out of this thing. So there's that, and they're growing and traveling up. All right. So we'll let that move up a little bit further. And that's fine. Next thing we're going to do is just add a couple lights to get this thing looking a little more interesting, if it will let me. Okay, there we go. So we're going to drag this one kind of into the just simple point lights here. Drag this one into the foreground a little bit and make it blue. We'll have it be our like daylight, and we're going to add just soft shadows to it. And we're going to add another light and drag this one kind of over to the right and into the background a little bit, so we have some light hitting it from the other side. And this will be our like kind of moody reddish, maybe orange interior light or something, just to give it a little moody feel. So that's looking pretty good. All right. So another couple things here. We can change, and if you zoom in, you'll be able to see it. And the great thing is this will update automatically. But you can change the interpolation of the XP trail, and we can just change that to Bezier and natural intermediate points. So you maybe saw a little change there. So you can kind of mess around with that just to give it smooth it out a little more. You'll see if we change it back to none and linear, maybe you didn't see too much of a change there. But yeah, so if you're running into issues with smoothing that thing out, that's where it's at to kind of fix that. But we can just leave it out linear for now. It'll be a lot quicker. And let's see. So let's get this thing animated. One thing we can do is maybe extend this timeline, because you might want to have this thing all kind of animated up before you start actually moving the tornado. Or maybe you want to start it like this, or however you want to do it. But in my example, I kind of let it spool up first and then start animating it. So we can just kind of, maybe start at like frame, we could just start at like frame 500. Animate this thing real quick. So what we're going to do is grab our controller, and I'll just move these up to the top. And we're going to do the top and bottom both at the same time. And this is just going to be very, very simple. You could, do lots with it, but just to kind of illustrate what we have going on, we're going to add select both of those and just add a keyframe at 500 and maybe move it to about 600, move it over to the right. And then move it to like 700, just keep it even. And then we can just select our first keyframes and control drag those over. So now it's just going back and forth. Now to make this a little more interesting, we can offset the top and bottom. So we probably want the bottom to lead and then the top to follow, or you know, vice versa. But now we can just kind of preview that moving along. We might need to change our, I don't know if this will help with that twitching, but change the up vector. That's looking pretty good. Let me just try that, see if that. Yeah, so my computer's stuttering a little bit, so it looks a little funny, but I think there was some twitching going on in there. But if you change your source spline that the helix is following to have intermediate points, I think that's what I changed it to natural. Yep, so I think that will work out a lot better. That looks a lot smoother. All right, so now we have this thing kind of sliding around and animating, and the great thing is you can just do a quick preview like this to check out the motion of your tornado, and then you can, you know, hit render. But you're gonna have to wait for that thing to build up. So in another way, you could just like totally crank up the speed of the emitter so it doesn't take 500 frames to build up. But that's up to you. Sometimes if you make it too fast, then you're going to have not as nice curvature in your particles. But you know, it all depends on what you're going for. I don't mind having, you know, the option here where we have a still kind of version of the tornado and then it takes off. So, you know, for this example, that works for me. So we're just going to let it build up and start moving a little bit, and then let's add our background in. And you can see that these trails kind of, you know, if the trail length right now it's at 16, you could decrease that if you don't like how much it's dragging, or you could also move your tornado a little bit slower so that it doesn't drag as much. But, you know, for me, that's fine to have that kind of movement. It's kind of cool, I think. But, you know, that is an option, just to slow everything way down in your timeline, and then in post you could speed it up just so you have smoother movement and less kind of drag on your trails. But for me, that works good. Let's see. So yeah, let's see. Let's just look at this. So we're just using the standard render, which is very quick. If you want to add AO to this, you're going to have to use the physical render, and that's going to increase render times a little. Well, yeah, quite a bit more. But you know, I really like how this looks already, and I don't really think it needs any AO for me anyway. But if you do want to add it, you'll find that ambient occlusion does not work with the standard render with the hair material on XP Trail. All right, so let's get the background in there. Background, and we're just going to create a luminant material. And just make it like a navy bluish or something. You know what? We want to do a gradient. So we'll change that to radial or not radial, but circular. Just so we get a little vignetting going on. That looks good. And then we'll just control drag that over and make the outside slightly darker. So yeah, you can see this this trail's dragging along. And there's a little bit of chaotic movement in there, but I think it works. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure to stop by Facebook, Instagram, follow me, and please follow me on Vimeo and subscribe on YouTube as well to stay up to date with the latest tutorials and experiments I have going on. All right, see you guys.